You wake up tired. Not the kind of tired that comes from a late night or a hard workout, but a bone-deep weariness that seems to have taken up permanent residence in your body. You drag yourself through your morning routine, force down coffee, and face another day of tasks that once energized you but now feel like moving through mud. You tell yourself you just need a vacation, a weekend off, a break. But here's the unsettling truth. You've taken breaks, and they don't help anymore. You return from rest still exhausted. Welcome to what we've labeled burnout. But Viktor Frankl would tell you something different is actually happening. We've become obsessed with burnout. It's the diagnosis of our age, the explanation we reach for when we can't get out of bed, when work feels unbearable, when life loses its color. We blame long hours, demanding bosses, the relentless pace of modern life. We're told the solution is self-care, better boundaries, more vacation days, meditation apps, and wellness retreats. And while these things have their place, they often fail to address the real problem. Because what we're calling burnout might not be what we think it is at all. Frankl, who survived the Nazi concentration camps and went on to develop logotherapy, observed something profound about human motivation and exhaustion. He noticed that people could endure extraordinary hardship, work incredibly long hours, and face tremendous challenges without burning out, as long as they felt their efforts meant something. Conversely, people could have relatively easy lives, reasonable work hours, and comfortable circumstances, yet feel utterly depleted and empty. The difference wasn't in the external demands, but in the internal sense of purpose. This is the insight that changes everything. You're not burned out from doing too much. You're burned out from doing too much that doesn't matter to you. The exhaustion you feel isn't primarily physical or even emotional. It's existential. It's your soul's way of protesting a life disconnected from meaning, purpose, and genuine contribution. It's the fatigue that comes not from overuse but from misuse of your one precious life. Think about it. When was the last time you felt truly alive, truly energized? Chances are it wasn't when you were relaxing on the couch binge-watching your favorite show, though that has its place. It was probably when you were engaged in something challenging, but meaningful, helping someone through a crisis, creating something you cared about, working toward a goal that mattered. You might have been physically tired afterward, but it was the good kind of tired, the satisfied exhaustion that comes from spending yourself on something worthwhile. Now contrast that with how you feel after a day of meaningless meetings, bureaucratic tasks, or work that feels pointless. You might not have been physically challenged at all, yet you feel drained, depleted, even despairing. This is what Frankl called the existential vacuum, the sense of inner emptiness that comes from a life lacking in purpose and meaning. And it's far more common today than we'd like to admit. Modern culture has sold us a seductive lie, that the goal of life is comfort, ease, and the minimization of effort. We're told that stress is always bad, that challenge should be avoided, that the ideal life is one of leisure and pleasure. So we optimize our lives for convenience. We eliminate friction. We seek the path of least resistance. And then we wonder why we feel so empty, so tired, so disconnected. If you're recognizing yourself in this description and want to explore a different path forward, consider subscribing to our channel. We dive deep into questions of meaning, purpose, and how to build a life that energizes rather than depletes you. The truth that Frankl discovered is that humans are not primarily motivated by the pursuit of pleasure or the avoidance of pain. We're motivated by the search for meaning. This is what he called the will to meaning, the fundamental drive to find significance and purpose in our existence. When this will is frustrated, when we can't find meaning in what we're doing, we don't just feel disappointed. We feel existentially exhausted. We develop what Frankl termed noogenic neurosis, psychological distress arising not from psychological conflicts, but from spiritual problems, from a sense that life lacks purpose. Look around at the burnout epidemic sweeping through every industry and demographic. Look at the young professional who has achieved everything she was supposed to achieve, the prestigious job, the impressive salary, the nice apartment, yet feels hollow and exhausted. Look at the mid-career executive who has climbed the ladder only to realize he doesn't care about the view from the top. Look at the parent who is doing all the right things but feels like they're going through the motions. These aren't people who are working too hard. They're people who have lost connection with why they're working at all. The pandemic made this crisis impossible to ignore. Millions of people, forced to step back from their routines, suddenly had to face the question, what am I doing this for? And many didn't like the answer. The Great Resignation wasn't primarily about people wanting more money or better benefits, though those mattered. It was about people refusing to continue spending their lives on work that felt meaningless, that didn't align with their values, that left them empty despite their paychecks. But here's where it gets tricky. You can't solve an existential problem with physical solutions. You can't meditate away a crisis of meaning. You can't spa treatment yourself out of purposelessness. You can't yoga your way through a life that doesn't matter to you. These things might provide temporary relief, like painkillers for a broken bone, but they don't address the underlying fracture. Frankl would tell you that the exhaustion you're feeling is actually a signal, a message from the deepest part of yourself. It's not saying slow down or take a break, though sometimes you need those things too. It's saying wake up. It's saying this isn't it. It's saying you were made for more than this. Your soul is refusing to invest energy in a life that doesn't reflect your values, that doesn't utilize your unique gifts, that doesn't contribute to something beyond yourself. This is why the standard burnout advice often falls flat. People are told to set boundaries, to say no more often, to protect their time and energy. All good advice, but it doesn't address the fundamental question. What are you protecting your time and energy for? If you successfully clear your schedule and reduce your commitments, what will you fill that space with? More of nothing? More purposeless downtime? More existential emptiness? The exhaustion epidemic of our time is not primarily a crisis of overwork. It's a crisis of undermeaning. We're not doing too much, we're meaning too little. And until we address that fundamental disconnect, no amount of rest, relaxation, or self-care will truly restore us. Because what we need isn't rest from work. We need work worth getting tired for. There's a question that haunts the modern world, whispered in therapy sessions, scrawled in journals at 3 a.m, muttered during commutes and lunch breaks. Is this all there is? It's the question of someone who has checked all the boxes, followed all the rules, achieved the prescribed markers of success, and yet feels profoundly empty. It's the question that reveals what Viktor Frankl identified as the primary human motivation. Not the will to pleasure, not the will to power, but the will to meaning. Frankl's insight represented a radical departure from the dominant psychological theories of his time. Freud had proposed that humans are primarily driven by the pursuit of pleasure, by the satisfaction of instinctual drives. Adler suggested we're driven by the pursuit of power, by the desire to overcome inferiority and assert ourselves. But Frankl, drawing from his observations in the concentration camps and his clinical work, argued that neither pleasure nor power is our fundamental motivation. What we're really after is meaning, the sense that our lives matter, that our existence serves a purpose, that we're part of something larger than ourselves. This isn't just philosophical speculation. Frankl noticed that in the camps, those who survived longest weren't necessarily the strongest or the healthiest, or those in the best circumstances. They were the ones who had a compelling reason to live, a manuscript to complete, a loved one to reunite with, a mission to fulfill. Their will to meaning gave them the resilience to endure what should have been unendurable. Meanwhile, those who lost their sense of purpose would often deteriorate rapidly, regardless of their physical condition. The same principle applies to the burnout you're experiencing right now, though your circumstances are vastly different. When your work, your relationships, your daily activities connect to a deeper sense of purpose, you have reserves of energy you didn't know existed. You can work long hours, face significant challenges, and still feel fundamentally okay because you know why you're doing it. The effort has a point. Your life is going somewhere. You're contributing to something that matters. But when that connection to meaning is severed, when you're just going through the motions, when your days feel like an endless series of tasks that don't add up to anything significant, that's when the existential exhaustion sets in. It's not that you've run out of physical energy. It's that you've run out of reasons to expend that energy. Your will to meaning is being frustrated, blocked, denied. And your psyche responds with the only protest it can, a profound sense of fatigue and futility. Frankl called this state the existential vacuum. the feeling of inner emptiness that comes from a lack of purpose. And he observed it not primarily in the poor, the oppressed, or the obviously suffering, but in the comfortable, the successful, the people who had everything except a reason for having it. The existential vacuum, he argued, is the mass neurosis of our time, though we disguise it with various labels: depression, anxiety, addiction, and yes, burnout. If this resonates with you, and you want to explore how to reconnect with genuine purpose, we invite you to subscribe to our channel. We're building a community of people who refuse to settle for a life of comfortable meaninglessness and are committed to discovering what their existence is truly for. The manifestations of the existential vacuum are everywhere. Look at the epidemic of addiction. People trying to fill the void with substances, behaviors, constant stimulation. Look at the obsession with entertainment and distraction, anything to avoid facing the emptiness. Look at the desperate pursuit of success markers that bring no satisfaction. Bigger houses, fancier titles, more impressive achievements that leave people feeling hollow. These aren't moral failures or character flaws. They're symptoms of a soul starving for meaning. Here's what makes this particularly insidious in our current moment. Modern life is exceptionally good at keeping us busy while keeping us meaningless. We have endless tasks, obligations, notifications, and responsibilities. Our calendars are full. Our to-do lists are long. We're productive, efficient, optimized. And yet, at the end of the day, the week, the year, we look back and wonder what it was all for. We've been busy, but to what end? We've accomplished much, but what did it accomplish? This is different from previous generation struggles. Our ancestors often faced material deprivation, physical hardship, limited opportunities. But many of them had something we lack: a clear sense of purpose embedded in their communities, their traditions, their roles. The farmer feeding his family, the craftsman perfecting his trade, the mother raising her children. These weren't necessarily grandiose purposes, but they were clear, tangible, meaningful. People knew what they were for. We, on the other hand, have unprecedented freedom to choose our own path, to define our own purpose. And for many, this freedom has become a burden. Without prescribed roles or clear purposes, we're left to figure it out ourselves. And in the absence of that clarity, we default to whatever society tells us matters: money, status, comfort, security. We pursue these things diligently, and then we're surprised when achieving them doesn't fill the void. Frankl distinguished between three primary ways we can discover meaning in life. The first is through creative values, what we give to the world through our work, our art, our contributions. This is the meaning we find in creating something, building something, leaving something behind. The second is through experiential values, what we receive from the world through love, beauty, truth. This is the meaning we find in connection, in awe, in genuine encounter with what's good and beautiful. But it's the third path that's most relevant to understanding burnout: attitudinal values. This is the meaning we find through the stance we take toward unavoidable suffering, through our attitude in the face of difficulty. When circumstances cannot be changed, when creative and experiential values seem blocked, we still possess the freedom to choose our response. And in that choice, Frankl argued, lies a form of meaning that nothing can take from us. The exhaustion you're feeling might be telling you that you've been pursuing meaning in the wrong places or in the wrong ways. Perhaps you've been trying to find it in external achievements when you need to look at your internal attitude. Perhaps you've been seeking it in pleasure and comfort when it actually requires challenge and contribution. Perhaps you've been waiting for your circumstances to provide meaning when you need to bring meaning to your circumstances. The will to meaning isn't satisfied by grand gestures or dramatic life changes, though sometimes those are necessary. Often, it's satisfied by recognizing the significance in what you're already doing, or by making small shifts that align your daily life with your deeper values. It's satisfied when you stop asking what you want from life and start asking what life wants from you. It's satisfied when you recognize that every moment, every task, every interaction is an opportunity to express something meaningful: compassion, excellence, service, authenticity. Your burnout isn't a medical condition requiring treatment. It's an existential message requiring attention. It's your will to meaning crying out to be acknowledged, honored, fulfilled. And until you listen to that cry, no amount of vacation days, salary increases, or job changes will truly restore you. Because what you need isn't a better situation. You need to discover what your life is for. The most dangerous question you can ask when you're burned out is, how do I feel better? It's dangerous because it assumes the problem is how you feel, when the real problem is how you're living. Viktor Frankl would tell you that you shouldn't primarily be asking how to reduce your discomfort, but rather how to increase your purpose. Because once you reconnect with genuine meaning, the exhaustion doesn't necessarily disappear, but it transforms into something bearable, even worthwhile. The fatigue becomes the satisfying tiredness of a life well spent rather than the depleting emptiness of a life wasted. So how do you actually do this? How do you move from existential exhaustion to meaningful engagement? How do you reconnect with the will to meaning when you've been disconnected for so long that you've forgotten what purpose even feels like? The answer isn't simple, and it's not the same for everyone, but Frankl's framework provides a roadmap for the journey back to yourself. The first step is the hardest. You must stop waiting for your circumstances to give you meaning and start recognizing that meaning is something you bring to your circumstances. This is a complete reversal of how most of us have been taught to think. We believe that meaning comes from having the right job, the right relationship, the right life situation. We think that once we finally get that promotion, meet that person, achieve that goal, then our lives will feel significant. But Frankl's insight is that this is backwards. Meaning doesn't come from what life gives us. It comes from what we give to life. This means that your current situation, even if it's far from ideal, already contains opportunities for meaning. The question isn't whether your job is inherently meaningful. Few jobs feel meaningful in the abstract. The question is whether you can find ways to bring meaning to your job. Can you serve someone through your work? Can you excel at something that matters? Can you use your role to express your values, to develop your character, to contribute something of worth? Even in the most mundane tasks, there's potential for meaning if you approach them with the right attitude. But let's be honest, sometimes the issue isn't your attitude toward your circumstances. Sometimes your circumstances genuinely need to change. Sometimes you're in a job that violates your deepest values, in a relationship that diminishes you, in a life situation that makes authentic living impossible. Frankl would never suggest that you should just adjust your attitude and accept intolerable conditions. What he would say is that even recognizing you need to change your circumstances and taking steps to do so is itself a meaningful act. You're exercising your freedom, honoring your values, taking responsibility for your life. That's meaningful, even when it's terrifying. The second step is to shift from asking, "What do I want?" to asking, "What is wanted of me?" This is Frankl's famous reversal, the recognition that life is questioning you, not the other way around. Each situation, each day, each moment presents a unique demand, a unique opportunity to respond meaningfully. Your task isn't to impose your desires on reality, but to discern what reality is asking of you and to respond with your whole self. This might sound abstract, so let's make it concrete. You wake up exhausted, dreading another day. Instead of asking, "How can I get through this?" or "When will this end?" you ask, "What does today need from me?" Maybe it needs you to show up with patience for a difficult colleague. Maybe it needs you to have a hard conversation you've been avoiding. Maybe it needs you to create something, to solve something, to acknowledge something. When you approach your day as a series of demands to be met rather than obstacles to be endured, everything shifts. If you're ready to make this shift from passive exhaustion to active purpose, we'd love to support you on that journey. Subscribe to our channel for ongoing insights into living with greater meaning, resilience, and authentic engagement with what matters most. The third step is to recognize that meaning often comes through commitment, not from keeping your options open. Modern culture tells us that freedom means having choices, keeping possibilities alive, never closing doors. But Frankl understood that true freedom comes from commitment, from saying yes to something fully, which necessarily means saying no to many other things. When you commit to a purpose, to a person, to a project, you're no longer scattered across infinite possibilities. You're concentrated, focused, directed. And that concentration is energizing in a way that endless options never can be. This is counterintuitive because we've been taught that burnout comes from overcommitment, and the solution is to pull back, to do less, to keep things loose. But often the opposite is true. We're exhausted not because we're too committed, but because we're not committed enough to anything that truly matters. We're spread thin across obligations we don't care about rather than invested deeply in purposes we believe in. The solution isn't necessarily to do less. It's to do less that doesn't matter, so you can do more of what does. The fourth step is to understand that meaningful suffering is different from meaningless suffering, and sometimes we have to choose the former to avoid the latter. The parent who sacrifices sleep for a newborn, the athlete who endures pain in training, the entrepreneur who risks security for a vision. These people are suffering, genuinely suffering, but it's suffering in service of something. And that makes all the difference. Frankl observed that people can endure almost any suffering if they know why they're suffering. What destroys people isn't hardship, it's pointless hardship. Your burnout might be your psyche's way of saying that your current suffering is the wrong kind of suffering. You're exhausted from meaningless meetings when you could be tired from meaningful work. You're depleted from maintaining appearances when you could be spent from authentic connection. You're drained from pursuits that don't matter when you could be invested in purposes that do. The solution isn't to eliminate all suffering and difficulty from your life. That's impossible and undesirable. The solution is to ensure that when you do suffer, when you do expend your limited energy, it's for something worth being tired for. The fifth and perhaps most important step is to recognize that meaning isn't something you find once and possess forever. It's something you must discover anew each day, sometimes each hour. The purpose that animated you yesterday might not be sufficient for today. The meaning you found in one season of life might not translate to the next. This isn't failure. It's the nature of the existential quest. You must remain awake, aware, responsive to what each moment is asking of you. This means that reconnecting with meaning isn't a destination you reach, but a practice you cultivate. It's the daily, hourly choice to live intentionally rather than automatically, to respond meaningfully rather than react mechanically, to ask what matters, and then align your actions with the answer. Some days you'll succeed brilliantly. Other days you'll forget entirely and slip back in a meaningless motion. That's okay. What matters is that you keep returning to the question, keep choosing to live purposefully, keep refusing to settle for a life of comfortable exhaustion. Viktor Frankl emerged from the concentration camps and dedicated the rest of his life to helping others discover meaning in their suffering. He didn't promise that finding meaning would make life easy or painless or free from exhaustion. What he promised was that it would make life worth living, worth the tiredness, worth the difficulty. Because a meaningful life isn't an easy life. It's something better. It's a life that matters, a life you can look back on without regret, a life that leaves you tired in the best possible way. You're not burned out. You're being called to something more than what you've been settling for. The exhaustion you feel is the price of ignoring that call. The question now is, will you keep paying that price, or will you finally answer?